Thank you so much. You know, sometimes in our lives, something happens to us that changes the way we think, that changes what we're going to do. And I wanted to start by telling you a story about something that happened to me almost 5 years ago, which really set me off into thinking about this question of how do we regenerate ourselves. About 4 years ago, I decided to take my younger son, Dominic, to Africa. You know, he's like many teenagers in London, spending lots of time hanging around, you know, and I wanted him to really understand what was happening in Africa. And in particular, you know, he was just becoming a young adult. I wanted him to spend time with the Maasai warriors. And so we took a plane, we took a little private plane, we got into a car, and eventually, it took us about 2.5 days, we ended up in a Maasai village in the middle of the Masai Mara in Tanzania. And just as we'd had hoped, there was a couple of Maasai warriors that spent time with us over a couple of days talking to us about their rituals and so on. Wonderful stuff. You know, this was great for a teenager to really understand what it was like to be a warrior. And one morning, he took us to the top of the hill. And what he was doing is he was showing us his Maasai territory. And he was talking about how it was to be a Maasai warrior and what it meant, the implications that they had to, you know, live by. And there he was standing in his whole Maasai wonderful red robes, carrying a spear to kill lions with. This was an authentic moment. And as we stood there, there was a funny little sound. Can anyone imagine what that funny little sound was? It's his mobile phone. So out of his pocket, you know, this sort of leopard skin pocket, he gets his mobile phone. And like every 23-year-old, he has a very excited conversation on his mobile phone. Well, at that moment, I realized that my world had changed more than I ever imagined it would have done or could do. But that wasn't the only thing that happened that afternoon, because when he put his phone down, being a sort of inquisitive professor at the London Business School, I said to him, what was the conversation about? Who are you talking to? And he said, I was talking to my brother. Now, he, as a warrior, his job was to look after the cattle, but his brother, who was younger than my son, a 12-year-old, was looking after the goats. And in fact, his brother had gone out that morning at 6 o'clock in the morning and had taken the goats out. This was about 12 o'clock by now. And and his brother, I said, well, I said, I was talking to my brother, and I said, well, what was the conversation? He said, my brother had phoned me to tell me that the goats had just found green grass. Now, you see, that for me is the paradox of the future, because in many ways, things changed beyond imagination. Who would imagine that a Maasai warrior 4 years ago would have a mobile phone? By the way, he had no electricity. He had no car. He had no refrigerator, but he did have a mobile phone. But yet, at the same time, there were things about his life that had remained essentially the same in terms of his values, his beliefs, what was important to him. You know, and I think the challenge that we face now is we are in the midst of the biggest transformation that the world had ever seen. When I wrote my book, The Shift, I said the biggest transformation since the Industrial Revolution. I don't think that's the case anymore. In the 2 years since that was written, I realize it's the biggest transformation ever. And one of the challenges that we face is to ask ourselves, what sort of a world do we want to construct? And more importantly, what sort of a life do I want to construct? And there's no question that there are some pretty tough things happening to us in the future. If we look into the future, what's clear is that you could walk into the future blindfold. You know, you can walk into a default future where you don't make choices, you let the future unroll. unroll in front of you, or you could be a lot more thoughtful about the future that you want to create. You can create, in other words, a crafted future. Now, to do that, I think you have to think about some of the things that are happening in our lives over the next couple of decades, both in terms of the bright side and in terms of the side which is a dark side. You know, one of the things that's really clear about the future, about our lives, about the lives of our children, is it could be a life of fragmentation. It could be a life where, in fact, everything is broken into 3-minute periods. If you look even now at your life, you'll find that even now you're constantly interrupted by technology. It's sort of like a bad-tempered 2-year-old. You know, you can't really find the time within your life that allows you to be reflective, that allows you to be thoughtful. So isolation, fragmentation, is a really important part, potentially, of our lives. But yet it doesn't need to be like that. The very technology that interrupts you, the very technology that behaves like the bad-tempered 2-year-old, can also provide enormous opportunities for co-creation. Right now, across the world, tens of thousands of people are joining together on platforms like Innocentive to share ideas, to think through the opportunities, to solve problems, both in their own country and indeed in other countries. It could be a world of isolation. There is a potential for many of us to be living in small families. We've moved into the city. We've lost our family roots. We're very mobile. We're working at home rather than in an office. And it could be a really isolated future. It could be a future where it's hard for you to connect. But at the same time, you know, there are opportunities, as we've heard today, to really connect into your societies, to connect into your communities, to be part of the place that you live. And it's a world of exclusion. It's a world where the rich get richer, where the poor become poor wherever they happen to be located. It's a world where if you don't, you're not educated, you can't join the global labor talent pool, you have no way of actually accessing the value that the world's creating. But it could be a world where you become engaged and where 5 billion people can connect to each other using the abundant knowledge that's available now through the sort of handheld devices that my Maasai warrior was holding, that could create enormous amounts of engagement. And what I want to suggest is that the challenge that we face now is that we could walk into the future blindfolded, or instead we could make some important shifts that change the way that we think, that change our behavior, that change some of the ways that we want our future to continue. And it seems to me that right now we are faced both with choices and with consequences. And I want to suggest 3 shifts I think each one of us should be thinking about in terms of how we create the sort of future that's going to be important to us. The first is about the way we think about our own skills. Now, you know, there was a time that you thought maybe, you know, to be a generalist would be wonderful. I just need to be like a T-shaped manager. I need to know a little about a lot of things. But frankly, if you know a little about a lot of things, your competition is not those smart, highly educated people in China. Your competition is Wikipedia and Google. So you need to build mastery. You need to focus on areas that you love, that you're passionate about, because the future, in my view, is about hyper-specialization. And if you can do 2 things, then that's even better. So, number 1, first shift, think about what you love, what you're passionate about, and really, really focus on it. Number 2, you know, certainly when I was growing up, what we thought was the way to get on was to compete. You know, that there was a rank, and some people would be at the top, and some people would be at the bottom. And the way to make sure that you were at the top was to compete with everybody else around you and to be the best that you can be. What we're now realizing about the future is there are incredible opportunities to build value through collaboration and through cooperation. Technology, those billions connected, abundant knowledge provides incredible opportunities, not simply to compete, but also to realize that networks are going to be important. And those could be the sort of networks that are the posse, you know, those people who are really close to you, who understand your knowledge, who can ride with you. It could be the regenerative community, those people who you're close to, who you give time to, who you can reflect to. It could be the big ideas crowd, the thousands of people you might know who between them have ideas that you can't even imagine, but the combination with your ideas could be very valuable. And the final shift is this. You know, when organizations began to industrialize, the deal between the worker was very simple. You work to earn money, to buy stuff that makes you happy. I don't think that that's working anymore. I mean, what we're beginning to realize is there's very little correlation between higher standards of living and better feelings about happiness or quality of life. And what we're also realizing is that if we're going to be working till 75, which we will be, and if we're going to have work as the center of our life, which for most of us it will be, work is where we find meaning. And I believe that in the future, the shift comes less from thinking about work as a means of making money to buy stuff that you can consume, but rather to see work itself as a source of enormous creativity and a source of enormous possibilities in terms of what would help each one of us to become the very best we can. You know, human potential is indeed infinite. And I believe that whilst there are some very tough parts of the path ahead, at the same time, we have opportunities for the next 10, 20 years to be incredibly exciting for every one of us. Thank you.